this leads to the next question, which is like, there's a lot of talk about democratization of AI and impact of, but then there's also this issue of impact of compute power, right? You rightly pointed out TensorFlow and PyTorch as one of those democratization tools, but this compute power is sort of still quite exorbitant in terms of like, it's a big entry barrier for many startups, many individuals. Like, for example, we spend more than $100 million in compute power every year, right? And some of the biggies spend an order of magnitude more than that, like global biggies. So this is not available to most companies. Like if you take even the most successfully funded startups, their sort of fundraising would be a small portion of this yearly budget for a company like ours, right? So how does this play out? Like, is this true democratization? Are these tools good enough without access to either the data or the compute power? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think democratization is still an aspiration, in my opinion, as you said. Like, I mean, I don't think we have democratized AI in a true sense, right? Like, because the most important thing for the AI to work is, first of all, you need to formulate your problem, right? Like, otherwise you end up solving the wrong thing, and so nothing else matters. But then, as you said, like the data is very important, right? So if you're a small startup, your data volumes would be smaller, and so you cannot afford. So deep learning and other modern methods won't work very well if you have small amounts of data, at least not now, right? I mean, there is a lot of research happening, I know, in unsupervised learning and zero-shot learning, and as those methods become more mature, then it will start working better. But in general, data is something that is more discriminatory, in my opinion. Like someone who has a lot of data would have more advantage than someone who doesn't have a lot of data. And then, as you said, the compute power, although it is available, it's expensive. Like not everyone can actually afford it. So, but I would still encourage, I mean, that's where the simpler methods that we talked about earlier becomes important. So in order to reap the benefit of AI, you don't have to start with the most sophisticated. You can get the first 80% with even simpler method if you have formulated the problem right, and then you trade from there. And then when your business grows and your user base grows, then you can embrace the more modern methods and get more juice out of it. Like getting a 1% lift or 2% lift on a small base is not as spectacular as getting a 1 or 2% lift on a very large base. And that's why bigger companies that have already scaled, they invest more in this, because a small percentage gain from the technology can have a magnificent impact on the business. But when you're smaller, I would focus more on the UI and how do you actually build UIs and user interfaces that can help you collect more feedback from the user without putting a lot of friction in the process. I think that's another problem that can actually have a huge impact on the AI you do. So AI doesn't start from the data that is already on your servers. AI starts when you start thinking about how should I actually even understand what the user is doing. And that in many cases depends on the UI you're building, understanding if your UI is only giving you very implicit indirect signals, then no matter what AI you use, you're not going to do that well. But if the UI can actually give you more direct signals about what the user is feeling, their emotions and their happiness, then you start getting a lot of juice out of the AI, even if it is a simpler method, right? So those two things are very important. And when you're starting out, I mean, as a startup, you have that advantage to kind of learn from others and then do some more innovation on the UI component and how you kind of understand the user. So although the startups have some disadvantage, but they also have the advantage of kind of learning. Like if you're building a new system today, the commenting system on social media doesn't work very well because there is a lot of, the moderation is not very good in many cases. And you kind of see a lot of comments that are not great. But if you're a new company, you can learn all of that from the existing, and then you can actually change your interfaces and your design to kind of mitigate some of the problem right from the very beginning. And that can give you a very big advantage. It's hard for an established ecosystem to completely change the ecosystem. It's kind of going to take a lot more time because a lot of people's involved in the ecosystem already. And so if you make a small change, it impacts a lot of other people in the ecosystem. So you can't make very drastic changes. But as a startup, you can actually be very drastic and kind of go in a very different direction. And that's where you can disrupt and innovate, right? And so it's interesting, right? I mean, you have disadvantage, but you also have advantage.